Why it's better to be widowed than to be a divorced trad wife. Let me start this video by saying that I am in no way saying that I do not have compassion for women who have lost their spouses. I know that it is heartbreaking to go through life without your soulmate. I have walked through widowhood with my own grandmother, friends, family members, one of my besties, and very recently a neighbor. What I hope to do is shine a little light on the grief and loss that women like myself experience while their husbands are still alive, and how in a lot of ways widowhood has perks over becoming a displaced homemaker. First, let me share with you the very last day that I ever spent with my husband, not knowing that it was going to be the last day that we'd spend together. 22 years into my marriage to my Mormon returned missionary husband, I would find out that he had a double life and had been cheating on me. We separated for a couple of years and then reconciled. I moved to another state to move back in with him. We had just combined our family again for 6 weeks. That reconciliation was such a honeymoon period. And one Saturday morning, he woke up early and asked if I wanted to go for a jog with him, which was a really big deal because most of our marriage, he had done things very independently. The fact that he invited me on his morning jog was really fun, kind of romantic, and gave me so much hope that we could repair this relationship. So I climbed out of bed, strapped on my running shoes, and off we went. When we got about 20 minutes away from home, we had this big Arizona monsoon that started pouring down on us. And because we didn't have anyone who could pick us up in a car, we decided to just duck and cover under a total stranger's front porch. And as we huddled there together, my husband wrapped his arms around me and he kind of had his beard on top of my head. And he was telling me that he loved me and that it felt so good to have me and the kids back in his life. And even today, talking about this, I can still remember those emotions of hope, of connection. This man had been the center of my universe since I was a 19-year-old girl. He was the last person on earth who still remembered my grandma, who had been dead for 10 years at that point. He was the father of my 4 children. We had watched these babies turn into toddlers and learn how to walk and go off to school and grow up and go on a Mormon mission and go off to college. We had built homes and businesses together, and I was very much invested in continuing to keep our family together and build a better future for all of us. Eventually, the rain stopped and we went home from our run and had breakfast with the kids, and at some point decided to go to a movie theater together. And again, I can remember to this day holding hands, like one kid on each side of us in the middle, holding hands together. And that feeling of being home and that feeling of we've got this. Later that night, I had somewhere that I needed to go. And my husband and my son were going to stay home and watch a football game together. And this is the last memory that I have of my family being together. I had made some like tailgating appetizers and things. And as I was walking out the door, my daughter was sitting on the couch eating some appetizers, waiting for the football game to come on. My husband and my son were out in the grass outside of our front porch, throwing the football. And I waved goodbye and smiled at them. And that image of my son having his dad throwing that football is still emblazoned in my life as the last real memory of our family being all together. After my thing, we went out and grabbed dinner at Payway and came home, watched TV, made love, fell asleep all tangled up in the sheets together. Sometime after midnight, I just had this like gnawing feeling in my stomach of not trusting how good that day had been. Like I was thinking to myself, this is one of the best days that we've ever felt together. And I got up to go to the bathroom just after midnight, grabbed his phone, whipped it open just to take a peek. Shortly after I left, I guess he had stopped throwing the football for my son and he had picked up his phone while I was gone and arranged to pick up a 19-year-old escort the next night, which he in fact did. And suddenly my entire marriage collapsed out from under me. The next morning, we were filing for divorce. Some people know the marriage is dead, the relationship is over, and they start to transition out and they plan for it. Some people lose those relationships just as suddenly as if their spouse died. And that was how my divorce was. Just a couple weeks after my marriage ended, when I was still totally in shock, not even wanting to get out of bed in the morning, one of my cousins, who's fairly young, not too much older than me, lost her husband unexpectedly to a health condition. And even though I was still like feeling terrible about everything, I got up, took a shower, got dressed, and went to the funeral because a lot of my family was going to be there. And I was sitting at that funeral that day that another cousin happened to mention to me, she's a lot better off than you are. And in the 6 years since both of us lost our spouses, she has done far better than me in almost every measurable way. And let me tell you why being a displaced homemaker was far worse in many regards than being a widow. Number one, post-divorce abuse. And let me take a moment here to warn all of you who are in situations of domestic violence that domestic violence can often and will often ramp up as soon as they no longer care about the wife. When they know you're divorcing, they will often get far more violent than they were while you were married. I wish that somebody had warned this about me so that I could protect myself. Once I was no longer Jake's wife, he became far more life-threatening to me than he ever had been in the 24 years that we had lived together. Number two, financials. I still haven't met a single man in this entire world who prepares his wife for divorce by making sure that everything's in her name, that she has some money, that half of the house will definitely go to her. No, most men fight the ex-wife hook, line, and sinker. While a lot of men do try to plan for their wives in case of their death with life insurance and other protective financial measures. My cousin inherited a huge chunk of life insurance, as well as getting the entire house and all of their property. As an ex-trad wife, I got zero, absolutely nothing. He had actually prepared for divorce, knowing that he was eventually going to ditch me, and he made sure that I got nothing. This small, teeny tiny $6,000 settlement that I got at the end of a 24-year marriage didn't pay for my attorney. We had no assets to divide. My name wasn't on the business. He didn't pay alimony. I left with nothing and still struggle to pay my bills to this day. Number three is rejection and betrayal. These are things that when your spouse passes away, you don't deal with. When you have been abandoned by your husband and the father of your children, it is soul crushing to think he doesn't love me anymore. And for me, he's living right across the street with another woman. I remember one weekend running into my soon-to-be ex-husband and one of his new girlfriends at the farmer's market in Gilbert, and they were dressed in matching shirts, and they were holding hands and laughing, and the feeling of rejection and betrayal was so overwhelming. I wanted to sink into the sidewalk. You don't deal with that when they're in heaven with Jesus. Death is accidental. They didn't want to leave you. Like, that's on God's hands. He took him. Co-parenting hell. Yes, some divorces are really nice, and your ex-husband is an amazing co-parent. Mine was not the case. And for a lot of trad wives that I hear from, and I hear from thousands and thousands of trad wives who have gone through divorces, the husbands weren't active in the parenting to begin with. The wife did all of that because of gender roles and division of labor within the home. So they typically don't make really good co-parents. And my ex-husband used my kids as pawns. And because I had been a stay-at-home mom and didn't have any income at the time of our divorce, I could never even afford to file very basic things with the court for enforcement, for protection. That leads me to court battles. I had zero money to even file for divorce. And he knew that. He had a high six-figure income at the time of our divorce. I had dropped out of college and been a stay-at-home mom for 24 years. A family member and some friends who put together a GoFundMe paid for my divorce at her. Next up is a category that's similar to the betrayal and rejection in the way that it makes you feel, but also different. And that is comparison. You can see this person who used to be your husband, your baby daddy, the person that you thought you were going to spend forever with, living with somebody else. And it was really, really hard to see. They have a nice house. I'm homeless. They're vacationing all over the country. I can't buy a loaf of bread. Going back to that day when he was at the farmer's market with this new girl in matching t-shirts, I was so devastated and traumatized by my divorce that I never wanted to be with another person again. I was still grieving and mourning. And that day, the comparison of he's happily moving on and I'm over here like crying my eyes out, going through 2 boxes of Kleenexes a day. When you're widowed, I mean, whatever your belief system is, they're in heaven with Jesus, or their ashes have been scattered across Maui, whatever the thing is for you. You don't see the moving on. I think too, if I'm being honest, there was a lot of comparison between like this new guy that I had never seen before and the guy that I had spent 24 years with. I was married to an obese jerk who dressed primarily in like camo and Dickies shorts. All of a sudden for the new girl, he's like doing CrossFit every day and he seems to be really nice, non-abusive. I know that's probably not healthy, but it's really hard not to compare the person that they get to the person that you got. Lastly, and I would say this is the most important, I saved the biggest one for last, and that is the lack of resources, support, and connection that divorcing trad wives, displaced homemakers have versus widowed. A friend of mine was widowed very young in her early 30s. And every year on her deceased husband's birthday and anniversaries and things like that, she will take flowers to the grave, have candlelight dinner at the grave, and everybody embraces her. They come together. Everybody makes sure that she's never alone on those days. Nobody does that when your husband just abandons you. In fact, in the 6 years since my marriage collapsed and I lost my husband, I don't think that anyone other than social media followers and journalists have ever said the words, "I'm sorry that you lost your husband." They all assume that you're just emotionally fine and also that you're financially fine, that he's paying his alimony and child support, that he's taking care of you, that some new guy's going to come along and pay all the bills. We don't have the resources, the support, the safety net, and the community understanding to help divorcing trad wives like myself connect, support themselves, and reintegrate into the world and rebuild lives that they never even imagined having to build. But I feel like we can. So here's our homework. If you know somebody in your life who has been a stay-at-home mom for many years and is suddenly finding herself in a divorce, do what I've done for some of my friends. Have a divorce shower so that you can buy some of the things for them that they are losing in the divorce. Ask how they need help and gather your friends together to support them in any way that you can. Make sure that they're not alone. That first week that we had 50-50 custody, and having been a trad wife for 24 years, having no husband, no children for a week, was one of the hardest weeks that I've ever lived through in my entire life. If you have a friend that you've just found out is divorcing, ask them how they want you to feel about it. Is it a congratulations type of divorce, or is it, I'm sorry, you're heartbroken and you need a hug? And just be sensitive to the fact that that trad wife divorce is the death of everything that that woman ever hoped for, ever dreamed of, and ever loved. And she may or may not ever be able to rebuild again. Thanks for watching. I'd love to hear your stories. I try to read every comment. Also, I'd love for you to join me on this journey by subscribing and giving a little like.